Gary, and hi everyone. Welcome to the first community of practice for the new year. And this will be our 7th community of practice, so we've actually covered a lot of ground over the last 12 to 18 months. And this session will be recorded, and on the Viability website, there's links to all of the previous recordings, so definitely encourage you to have a look at those. So with each of these community of practices, we have a key theme and we have a guest presenter. And today we're talking about disability employment transitioning to social enterprise. So really excited to have Myron Mann presenting. He's the CEO of Bedford. Myron and I have had a few conversations about his experience in the organisation's journey. So he's going to lead us through the strategy that he's developed, that we're all facing, this fast changing environment around supported and open employment. And so this, as with all community of practices, this is an opportunity to discuss other people's experiences as well. So at the end of Myron's presentation, we'll open it up for discussion, conversation. If you want to put questions in the chat, that's fine, but we won't get to it until the end, and I can certainly facilitate that. Just to introduce Myron, and Bedford firstly. So for over 70 years, Bedford has been providing meaningful employment in 4 key areas: hospitality, packaging, manufacturing, and landscaping and garden maintenance. So Myron is going to talk in detail about social enterprises, but also about some of those particular businesses and the smaller social enterprises in regional South Australia. They're the 2nd largest employer for people with disability in Australia, providing a holistic range of NDIS services for a significant number of clients and across many sites. So looking at 18 sites, I would suggest that's probably, well up there in terms of possibly the largest, 2nd or 3rd largest in terms of locations as well. Myron joined Bedford in August 2021, initially as the COO and now as the CEO for just over a year. Previously, Myron has founded and been the CEO of an investment firm, a manufacturing company, and most recently a business transformation advisory firm. So I'd encourage you to go and look at Myron's profile on LinkedIn. You can see a lot more detail there. As you know, with these sessions, we don't want to spend too much time introducing people. We wanted to get into the detail. But certainly what I'm excited about hearing Myron's presentation is he's coming from a very commercial, transaction-orientated industries, and he's joined this sector right in the midst of some significant change. So very interested to hear Myron's take on his strategy and where to from here. So Myron, I'll hand over to you. I'll stop sharing my screen, and if you're right to share your screen.
Thank you, Andrew. Let me just get the screen up here, and there. Now, hopefully everybody can see the screen.
Yep,
so thank you to the NDS and Andrew, Kerry, Paul. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present today. I always look at these opportunities as a chance for us to learn from all the questions and experiences of everyone that'll be on this this presentation. As much as us telling our story, we'd like to learn, because it's not going to be an easy journey, as you'll come to understand as we take you through our strategy. First of all, I have to say that it's not my strategy. I have a very strong executive team and a board, and I'll talk a little bit about them as we get into the presentation and the role they played in all this. But it's been a real team effort in trying to come up with this forward strategy for Bedford. So what I hope to do today is really take you through what was behind it, the why, if you want to look at it that way, a little bit about how and what we're going to do, and then I'll take you through a specific example of our first social enterprise, which actually opened yesterday. Will officially open in sometime in March, but opened yesterday with all the training. And that's going to be required to get it up and going. But so we'll have a look behind the scenes as to how we arrived at the strategy to start with. So I might just start by making sure that can work out. I just want to really focus in it just for the minute and talk about purpose. I don't think you can run a successful not-for-profit or successful disability employment business unless you really truly have nailed your purpose. Now, the purpose is quite generic often, and I expect if we looked across all the organizations that are on this particular presentation, we'll find that those purposes are not that different. They kind of say the same thing. But one of the things we did to start with is we re-examined our purpose. We really wanted to make sure that, you know, what was our purpose? Were we dedicated to that purpose? And we wanted to make sure that purpose sat in front of us as we developed our plans. So today in Bedford, there's not a management paper or a board agenda or a CapEx that doesn't start with the purpose, and everything then comes back to whether or not we're fulfilling that purpose. So I would encourage you, before you do anything in terms of where you think you might be going, is to really have another look at your purpose and just make sure that that's exactly what you're designing your future to be. So why change? Why look at social enterprises? We've been in a supported employment for, as Andrew said, for a long time. Bedford actually started as a employment vehicle for people that were recovering from tuberculosis, and right after the war, and sort of morphed into disability employment over time. So employment is part of who we are. That's what we do. But we know the world of employment is really under pressure. It's under scrutiny. It will see change. How long that change will take, maybe that's something we can have a discussion about towards the end, and I'll talk a little bit about some of that as well. But I guess what I want to try to do over the next 2 or 3 slides is really talk about a little bit what was going on in the sector, or at least what I thought was going on in the sector, and what the team thought was going on in the sector. And we filled multiple whiteboards full of things that I often refer to as noise. It was just what was happening in the background. So the first thing we looked at is the whole sort of concept of moving away from group settings into individual settings. Whether you want to call it segregated employment or however you want to describe it, the advocates would always talk about segregated employment as something that shouldn't exist going forward. Look, it'll take a long time for society to come to grips with that. We know what the voice of our employees and employees across Australia have to say around supported employment. But the same thing is being said of whether it's education or whether it's accommodation. The idea that disability should be segregated from normal society, is a concept that it will gain in momentum, and it will take time, but and it should happen. I don't think anyone argues with that. It's just going to be difficult to transition from where we are to where ultimately we want to go. But one of the things that we looked at with our strategy was really around what did it mean when we talked about moving from group supports to individual supports, and how that might affect the way we designed our strategy, how we looked at business going forward. What did it mean in terms of our focus on the intensity of supports, the frequency of supports, what did it mean in terms of cost, all of those things that were coming into play. So we'll come back and touch on some of these as we look at what we actually did in just a minute. But that was the first thing we did, was sort of really workshop what it meant to go from group support to more individual support. Then came the real noise. So there was the very first observation that I made when I came into the disability sector was how fragmented it was, and the lack of coordination between various agencies, various participants. It just seemed to me that even the government itself had a fragmented approach. There's two different ministers that oversee different parts of disability employment. I'm talking specifically employment today. You've got people like Centrelink who are under Treasury or administering the disability support pension and the initial sort of test for NDIS. You've got NDIS employment, and I think the NDIS is a wonderful thing. So I don't want to be highly critical of the NDIS. I think it's done an enormous amount of good for people with disability. But I think employment is a misfit in NDIS. That's my opinion. I just don't think the focus is right, and I think it's a very immature contract. What you have with the NDIS is you have a cost reimbursement scheme. So there's a market price that's assumed for what a support should cost, and that's what you get reimbursed if you provide that support. That part of the NDIS, and I'll get to it in a minute, really doesn't provide an incentive if the real objective is to transition employees from supported employment to open employment or somewhere in between. The way that the NDIS handles employment and provides support for employment does nothing, provides zero incentive. Now, my friends at the NDIS will take me to task on this because I said it in front of the Royal Commission, and I've had a number of meetings with them, but I still challenge them to put their finger on the line that shows me in the price guide where they actually support people moving to open employment, and how you can actually achieve that through the way that the NDIS operates in employment. So that's my criticism. It's not a criticism of the NDIS, it's a criticism of how employment is structured in NDIS. We then had the Fair Work Commission. So recently, we finally got to the end of a 7-year trial. We sort of know where we're going at this point. It may yet be challenged. We'll find out. But that was looming in the background, so that was part of the noise. We had the Royal Commission. I don't think anybody would rightly think today that supported employment is going to be seen as anything but negative by the Royal Commission. So it's certainly not going to be very kind to people like Bedford or what they still call ADEs, even though ADEs probably disappeared with the NDIS. Centrelink doesn't seem to engage at all in the discussion around what is probably the biggest obstacle of people transitioning to open employment, and that is the potential to lose benefits, either their pension or benefits associated with that pension, and if they move through a certain threshold. Then you've got the Department of Social Services. It runs a different employment model under a different minister. There's lots of conversation that in the past about the amount of money that was going to be there to transition people to the higher wages. I think, again, my take on that is probably that money is never going to be seen. It's certainly not going to be a wage subsidy if it is. Then you had the political concern of NDIS cost sort of going through the roof. Even though employment's a small part of that, it's getting caught up in that conversation. So it's an emotional topic. It's a political dynamite, if you want to try to touch it. At some point, Treasury will touch it on the basis that they'll just simply say there's only this much money to be allocated. So there will be changes forthcoming to the NDIS as we know it today, and we're starting to see some of those. I'm sure you've already had some of those discussions. And then there's the resistance to change that I saw in the market, talking with lots of people in supported employment. I had plenty of people say to me they were, if wages go up and we can't afford to do it, we'll just simply shut down. That's doesn't help anyone. Particularly doesn't help people with disability. It certainly doesn't serve the purpose. So we said we don't want to be in that category. We need to do something. We had some internal noise, if you want to call it that. We looked at what was going on within our own organization. We were trying to transition to the new employment model. That was cumbersome. It was costly. It was incomplete at the time. Our mindset was still very much in the old business model of block funding, and money was being used to, sort of substitute NDIS funding for the way we used to operate. We hadn't gotten our heads around how we could change. The rising cost of compliance continues to go up. It's hardly a month goes by that something else doesn't come along that increase the cost of compliance or governance around what we do, and rightly so, but makes it more difficult for providers in supported employment to essentially make it work. We had a growing admin around with the number of employees that we have. We had 1,100 new customers, 1,100 new individual debtors accounts and service agreements and employment contracts. We would wear all the credit risk if for some reason we didn't get paid. So there was the growing cost of admin on top of the compliance cost. Internally, we had inadequate systems, still do. Hard to make everything work without proper systems. But one of our focuses today is actually the amount of investment we're having to put into systems. But at the scale that we were trying to operate, sort of normally accepted CRM systems just weren't adequate for what we were trying to do. But what we did have is we had a very strong balance sheet, blessed with the practice of people that came before us in terms of the way that they were conservative with the money. They created a strong property portfolio and a strong balance sheet with a strong a large investment fund, which we could tap into to try to make this transition. And you'll see how we're going to do that in just a second. And probably most important, we had a management team, an executive team, a board, and a senior leadership group that was open to change, knew we had to change, didn't question the why, although we sometimes ask how we got here, but didn't question the why. But all we did was, let's focus on what we need to do in order to change. So we took all those things and put them into a bit of a traditional SWOT analysis, and looked at them in terms of, okay, if we get ready to create a brand new strategy and we need to change some things, how are we going to address where those opportunities are? How are we going to address where the threats are? And what strengths do we have, and what weaknesses do we need to overcome? One of the things you might notice if you look at that chart is the Bedford brand sits within strengths and weaknesses. It has a very strong awareness in South Australia. Probably almost everybody in South Australia knows who Bedford is. They may not know exactly what we do, but they know who we are, so the awareness is there. But we were getting hammered from the Royal Commission and in other areas, around the fact that we paid low wages, even though they were part of the supported wage award. So the brand was both working for us and at times working against us. So that's been part of what we're doing in terms of our brand strategy, is how do we address this so that we can actually communicate this story properly. We have a fantastic story to tell. We probably just haven't done a particularly great job of telling it over the years. So one of the things we have to do is get much better at that. When you see the little icon for people down there in weakness, that's not a criticism of the people that work at Bedford. That's a recognition of the fact that if we're going to go through this sort of change, do we actually have the skill base, or do we have the ability to bring everyone on the journey with us to ultimately understand those changes that we're going to have to make? So we saw that as a weakness in ourselves that we really needed to address when it came to leadership development, management development, and it starts with getting that purpose defined and getting clarity around the strategy. So let's talk a little bit about how we went into the strategy. So we started out with a design criteria, and this may be the sort of most important slide in the background behind what we did. And we tried to sort of pull all of the political, the social, and the disability environments into one, and we created the design criteria for how we wanted to look at strategy going forward. So the very first one was the independence creation. So the focus on individual capacity development as opposed to group, as we talked about it. We wanted to focus on vocations. We wanted to focus on having a continuum of opportunities, and you'll see that when we go through the Bedford social enterprise, how that actually works. There was a real shortfall in the market for people who wanted to get into open employment. There just simply wasn't a market. So Bedford has decided as part of our strategy to actually become the market maker, and we will create an open employment environment within our social enterprises. And we'll show you that in the structure, but we recognize that there just simply weren't any jobs. People were talking about open employment, but with very few opportunities. In fact, most of the large employers I talked to were scared. They didn't know how to do it. They didn't know what to do. The WHS people were saying, don't do it. Insurance people were telling them not to do it. So they too had a lot of external influences, even though if they may have had a lot of goodwill, they were scared as to how to do it. So one of the things we're creating within the new strategy is an advisory service business that helps people understand how you can employ people with, in Bedford deals, 95% of the people at Bedford would have an intellectual disability. So how you can employ them and how you might do that in an open employment environment. The second area was the funding independence, and we needed to really move beyond the core dependence on NDIS. All of our financial modeling would suggest to us that if more than in supported employment, I'm not talking about other areas of NDIS services, but in supported employment, if your funding is, if your revenue is more than 35% NDIS or government funding, then that's probably not a sustainable business going forward. And we can talk about that in the questions and answers. So we were looking at the fact that 65% of the revenue really needed to come from the commercial side of the revenue, and no more than 35% from NDIS funding. That's our financial modeling. Yours might tell you a slightly different story. But what we did know was that we couldn't build an organization for the future that was completely dependent on NDIS funding or had some significant dependence on NDIS funding. We had to move away from that. So we had to look at businesses that would actually allow us to create commercial opportunities. And so it was one of the things that we recognized that where we were was the fact that in the world of, and I'll use packaging as an example because so many supported employment providers would do some form of packaging. It was an area that was at the lowest part of the value-added chain, and there was a reason for that. Under block funding, that's where you created the most jobs, so you got more money. And so where you have low value add, you have a higher number of jobs, and that's where everybody went, and that's where customers were happy to give you the business. They didn't want to do that. They wanted to do the parts of the business that were close to the customer, or they wanted to do the parts of the business that were on the design side or the product development side. The low value add piece in the middle was where we all wound up, and that just doesn't have a future. You can't control the volume, which we recognized. We could see that historically, that when the volume was up, fine, we had a lot more activity, a lot more funding, all those things were working. When the volume was down, then we had nothing for people to do. So we had to get out of this cycle somehow by actually controlling the supply chain from start to finish. So these social enterprises that we're talking about are all designed to actually do just that, to move us away from that one small segment of the supply chain, which is where the lowest value add portion actually is. We looked at the social expectation, creating well-paid jobs, award wages, moving off of supported award wages, the quality of the jobs. We looked at the types of jobs that young people were wanting to work in versus, let's say someone had been at Bedford for 30 years. They may be quite happy doing some of the tasks that we had, but a lot of young people were reluctant to want to join in. So we needed to change that perception of what employment was with someone like Bedford. We needed to create an environment where there was, principles of inclusion and accessibility and equity, which are all part of the values that we have at Bedford today. And then the most difficult one, and we'll talk about it as we get into the structure in just a second, was the fact that how are we going to do this and not leave people behind? I mean, the reality was there was a certain portion of the cohort that probably were never going to transition to the social enterprise. They required significant supports, and they really did not necessarily even want to move into that form of employment through open employment. So there was a social expectation that we had to take into consideration. And then the businesses had to be self-sustaining. How are we going to find these businesses that we compete? We know that our productivity was probably going to be lower than most of the people who might do this, in another environment outside of disability. We landed on a strategy of working in industries that were underserviced in South Australia. So we used a consulting firm to assist us in identifying some of these areas. We used this as a proxy for price competitiveness, so that we knew if we were able to find an area that was underserviced, then the price competition would not be as severe as it would be if we were in a highly competitive environment. So the one I'm going to talk to you about in just a minute is a contract kitchen that we've just opened. So if we looked at the East Coast, sort of Melbourne and Sydney, Brisbane, we'd find 1,500 square meters of contract kitchen per million of population. In South Australia, there was 0. So there were a few restaurants that were using their kitchens at night as contract kitchens to make small quantities of prepared meals and things like that, but there was nothing commercially happening in South Australia. So it was an opportunity that we thought would actually give us a competitive advantage. So those were the design criteria that we used. We consistently referred back to those design criteria as we landed on the actual strategy itself. So what is it? So if you look at this particular slide, on the left-hand side of the slide is says Bedford Services Supported Employment. in the dark blue, that's actually Bedford today. So that is the NDIS registered Bedford. That is supported employment, and that's not going away. It's going to be a long time before supported employment in terms of what we do today will completely disappear. It will evolve, it will change, it will become better, it will become more meaningful, it'll pay better wages, it'll be higher quality jobs, there'll be more technical jobs. All those things will change in the area, but it will not go away. And in fact, we suspect that the majority of our employees will remain in that part of our business for a long time to come. What we have done is create another, on the far right-hand side, another group of businesses called Bedford Social Enterprises. Now, this is open employment. So people here, this is not an NDIS registered business. So you've got NDIS in this chart. You'll see NDIS is on the next chart. You'll see it's Bedford Services, Bedford Advisory, or NDIS, but Bedford Enterprises is not. They are a social enterprise, and our definition of a social enterprise is it has a purpose, and our purpose is to employ people with disability. It runs for profit, and it reinvests 100% of its profit back in its purpose. So these are separate legal entities under Bedford Enterprises. So where you see contract kitchen, manufacturing, joinery, APG is our landscape construction business, food and beverage, timber, embroidery, property development. Those are all standalone legal entities. They are all standalone enterprises that all employ people with disability. We would expect each of those enterprises to employ 20 to 30% of their staff would have a disability. There's no difference between who we employ. Everyone's paid on an equal basis. And then the opportunity is for people to move through these organizations, and if opportunity then exists in the open employment in the public arena outside of Bedford, then certainly the success for us would be that people are able to move on into open employment and establish their own careers with outside of Bedford. So the way this is actually set up, Bedford Corporate is basically your finance, your marketing, your safeguarding, people, culture, and we have a lotteries and fundraising division that sits in Bedford Corporate. Bedford Services is our supported employment. It also runs our community activities and day options programs. It runs our SIL accommodation. It runs most of our regional operations because they tend to be smaller. And it runs the traditional supported employment, packaging, gardening style businesses. But these businesses are rapidly changing. But today, I'm just going to focus on the social enterprise, but happy to talk a little bit about potentially how you change some of those supported employment businesses to address some of the questions of the future. Bedford Advisory is a arm of Bedford that supplies services either to Bedford, can supply them to Bedford Services or Bedford Enterprises, can supply them to another supported employment provider, or can supply them to open employment. So they're job coaches and support personnel that actually, this is a professional services business that charges for its time, basically. So if someone has an NDIS plan that works in one of the local supermarkets and they need a job coach, Bedford can provide that service directly to the individual. So this remains part of the NDIS. If there are people with NDIS plans within the Bedford Enterprises, even though they may be on a full wage, they need support, they can get those supports from the job coaches internally. So those are the three arms that make this up. You can see that contract kitchen at the very top of Bedford Enterprises. That's the one I'm going to take you through exactly what that is. The manufacturing, joinery, APG, timber, and embroidery are actually existing businesses in Bedford that we are transitioning from supported employment to open employment through social enterprise. Some of that requires capital investment to automate certain parts of our manufacturing and our operations. Some of it requires skill training, development. Some of it's required getting our pricing right, moving out of the sort of supported employment arena into the true commercial world. So a lot of work to be done, not without risk. Clearly, some of you will probably ask me about that, but these are existing businesses that we believe can actually transition into a for-profit social enterprise. So if you look at how this hopefully works in the future, is that Bedford Enterprises is making a profit. It's reinvesting its profit back in its social enterprises and can also reinvest it back into supporting and subsidizing, if required, some of the supported employment. Our lotteries and fundraising business that sits up in the corporate is really there, and our target with lotteries and fundraising, we'll be very open and honest about it. Our target is to cover all the corporate overhead by raising enough money to do that. That's just how we see this sort of circle of life, if you want to call it, as to how we're going to actually continue to provide those supported employment services that are very difficult to make money in, and how we're going to actually help fund those, particularly if the NDIS funding actually starts to be reduced. So what does that look like, just in a slightly different way? So again, on the left-hand side where it says Bedford Services, Bedford Advisory, those are NDIS funded. If you look at, there's commercial revenue, and our aim there is to get that commercial revenue into that 65-35 sort of ratio that we talked about. That's a big task. That's not easy, but it's something we're striving for. And that's going to happen by changing the nature of some of the types of businesses and jobs that we run in those areas. It's probably never going to happen in a packaging world. I think we have to just be honest about that and realize that that's going to would be a very, very difficult task. Wages are going to go up pretty quickly, given the ruling in the Fair Work Commission. So there's work to be done there to make that viable going forward. But at the same time, on the other side, through the social enterprises that we're talking about, we now have legal entities. You'll see off to the very far right-hand side that social impact fund. So the way this works for Bedford is Bedford has its own investment fund. Today, that investment fund sits at about $26 million. We provide the seed capital to get these enterprises up and going. We prove the business model, and then we will go out and raise funds through a social impact fund to either pay Bedford back or to expand that operation into more sites. So the contract kitchen, for example, we funded that very first contract kitchen for about $1.7 million to set it up. We now have to prove that business model works so that we can actually go out and talk to the investment community. Now, I won't talk too much about impact funds because Andrew's explained to me that potentially there may be a session on social impact investment in the future. But suffice it to say, it's part of our strategy to work with investors who are looking for the S in the ESG, but they also want a financial return. So we have worked with Flinders University here in South Australia to basically set up the criteria for how we measure impact. across each of these social enterprises. And it's essentially, the trick is really in capturing the data correctly, so you can report that impact back to your investors. So that's essentially how it works. So you've got one side of the organization is NDIS. You got another side of the organization that's not NDIS. So in that social enterprise, there's no safeguarding, there's no NDIS compliance. This is not an NDIS. These are not NDIS registered entities. Otherwise, you just simply wouldn't be competitive in the commercial world. So I'll just skip that slide. I won't talk about that. So I'm going to just take you through the Brooklyn Park experience and tell you a little bit about what we've done there. And it'll just give you, sometimes just going through a live example will help actually understand what we mean by the social enterprise. So Brooklyn Park is a suburb in Adelaide. There was an old Council Works depot that's now being converted into a light industrial park, and so we chose that particular location on the basis of accessibility and transportation. So I'll just take you through it. So basically, Bedford's been involved in the disability community for a long time. We've got a long history. As I said, we've got a strong balance sheet. We've already announced just back in November that we're going to invest $50 million in this plan to move from a supported employment to a combination of supported employment and social enterprises. Most of that investment's in property and capital equipment. Just trying to get fit for purpose buildings. A lot of our buildings are old, they're tired, they're dated, and they needed a lot of upgrading. Sometimes building new ones is just far more viable than actually trying to upgrade the old ones. But you get a sense of who we are down the right-hand side. But the idea was to actually create these social enterprises because we wanted to give people with intellectual disability an opportunity to learn, to actually have a skill, have a career, work in open employment, and many of them will transition very easily to it, and then move on to wherever they want to, whether it's their own business. If we can help them do that, that's terrific. If they want to move into another commercial kitchen or work in a restaurant or whatever, and then that looks like success to us if we can make that happen. But it is a commercial operation. I don't want to miss that point. This is designed to make money, to reinvest back in what we do. So we had to become the market maker. I mentioned that. I don't know the experience that many of you online may have, and I'd be interested to hear, but we just didn't see a lot of employees who looked like they were getting opportunities in open employment in South Australia. The jobs just weren't there. We may have had 3 or 4 people a month who said they left to go to open employment. Very rarely did they engage Bedford to assist with that. Maybe that's a weakness on our part. Maybe they didn't realize we could or would, even though their plan may or may not have supported it. But the opportunities weren't there. We do know that about 50% of the people that say they leave to go to open employment return. They're not happy in open employment, whether they're uncomfortable with how they're treated or what they're required to do, or what the situation is, that they don't stay very long. The others, we don't really know how long they stay because we don't always know exactly where people go. But it was very clear that the opportunity for open employment just simply wasn't there. So why not actually create it? Why not create enterprises that we could put people into open employment, pay a full award wage, and actually have commercial entities that actually performed well and made sense? So that's our challenge. getting people across, getting our staff trained to manage this, operating at sort of maybe 75, 80% productivity levels compared to other types of employers. You know, that was always going to be the challenge. So that's why we had to land on which enterprises made sense for us. So our commercial kitchen really is focused on, this is a large commercial kitchen. I'll show you the quantities in just a minute, but it's actually focused on recruiting and teaching people with disability and normal staff, people without disability, the same skills, the ability to prepare food, the ability to cook food, the ability to package food properly, the ability to store food properly, the ability to clean up. All of those things were part of what they had to learn, and the ability to work in an environment that's not so easy. It's clearly not Gordon Ramsay, but it's, you know, it's also not supported employment. So it will mirror the real world when it comes to the way the kitchen operates. Its real purpose was to provide this platform so that people could train and move forward. Our real goal and success measure will be getting as many people into open employment as we possibly can. So it came down to site selection, getting the right equipment, getting the right environmental. This is a completely green kitchen. The goal here is zero waste. So we've got an e-water solution system, which allows us to recycle all the water, to basically clean all the food with an e-water system, which reduces all the chemical usage and that sort of thing. We take all the green waste and all the protein waste and put it into a machine at the end of the day and create pellets that can be sold as fertilizer. We've partnered with Food Bank to make sure there's no waste. So we'll not only be making their prepared meals, we'll also be making sure that if there are any meals at the end of the day that don't get shipped or don't get consumed, then they'll wind up where they will have an impact with Food Bank SA. And the quality is key when you're obviously in food, and this all comes under the Bedford Group Food Safety Management Plan, which has all the registrations and certifications that are required for us to be in this business. So this kitchen is 180 square meters. It's got 80 pallets of frozen storage capacity and 125 pallets of cold storage capacity. It'll operate 2 8-hour shifts a day. It'll make about 1,700 meals per 8-hour shift. Almost a ton of raw protein that will be converted into finished product per shift. And the whole food safety plan is designed to facilitate vulnerable community capability. So it's a fairly large, ambitious venture. And as I say, it opened up yesterday with training starting for all the staff in the kitchen. I'll just quickly just show you. I mean, this is just how we built it basically in terms of the performance pillars. It was profitable by design. The safety obviously came right at the very top. The commercial outcomes and customer satisfaction are right at the very top. Innovation, and we'll show you some of the innovations that are in there, and then the social enterprise where we do the training and development and measure the community impact by what we do. We're certified by Social Traders at this point as a social enterprise here in Australia, and we work with the Adelaide Institute of Hospitality as a strategic partner to deliver the tailored training and learning packages. So you can see at the bottom, you should be able to follow the pipeline at the bottom from training all the way through to open employment, and that's our goal. You can work in open employment within our social enterprise, or if you want to move external and there's an opportunity for a career, we would help you achieve that. So all of the equipment has a QR code, so that which takes you to a video. So it in terms of the safety regulations or how to operate that piece of equipment. So if any of our employees want to, they can just download that onto their mobile. They can watch it on the bus when they come to work, or watch it at night, or whatever. If they feeling uncomfortable about operating a piece of equipment, they can just scan the QR code, watch the video, then operate the equipment. So we've tried to embed some technology to help everyone to feel more comfortable and not be afraid to use the equipment, and feel like they can actually do it themselves. So lots of different ways to learn. The equipment's all smart equipment. We'll be cooking overnight. It's all internet controlled. So everything is pretty high tech in terms of this kitchen. It's probably the highest tech kitchen or one of the highest tech kitchens in Australia by the time we finished. In fact, that's what the people that put the equipment in told us. They said they haven't actually put one in that's got this much technology built into it. But we also think that's going to attract younger people into this social enterprise who want to work with technology, but also might want to learn to cook or be a chef, whatever they might want to do. So Bedford has a head chef now who will be managing the kitchen. We have a head of food safety and quality. The two of them have been with us throughout the journey of building this enterprise, building the building and the property. And so they've now moved in there as of yesterday to start the operation. So that's a description of basically the contract kitchen. We expect this kitchen to be profitable within 5 to 6 months of operation. And we expect that we will have something like 40 to 50 employees in the kitchen, of which 20 to 30% of those employees will have an intellectual disability. They all will be paid an award wage. So that's the background behind it. That's an example, and I'm happy to take questions or have a debate on any of it. I'm looking forward to learning from everyone. So thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Myron. And as we discussed and as expected, that was definitely informative and certainly a new lens to look at some of the challenges that our organisations are facing. So thanks very much for sharing that level of detail about the strategy that you went into. We'll certainly open it up for questions. So what I'd encourage people to do is, if you've got a question, turn your video off. I'll ask you to unmute yourself just so that we don't have people talking over each other. And because I'm facilitating, I get to ask the first question, which Myron, I meant to send to you earlier. But I've got a couple of questions. The first one around this separate legal entities. So these social enterprises that you're starting, you have the option of either running it underneath the overarching corporate structure or setting up it as a separate legal entity. I'd be interested to understand what were some of the drivers to set them up as separate legal entities. But then also for people, I think on the call where your organisation's invested $1.7 million into a new kitchen, if you could perhaps just elaborate on, that's a significant investment. It's obviously hasn't just been a business plan and then you've been given the green light. Did you have to get some contracts across the line before, or an intent from customers to give you business? So you mentioned food bank there, and you're talking about being profitable within 5 to 6 months. So obviously you haven't started yesterday and opened the doors and hoping the business is coming to you. Maybe you could just tell us a little bit about the level of business that you converted before you got the green light for the 1.7 million investment.
Sure. So I'll answer the first question around the legal entities. So they are for-profit entities. They're legal entities, each one separately a legal entity for a couple of different reasons. Firstly, they're separate they're separate legal entities, because if we bring other investors in, then they may or may not come into each individual social group wise into social enterprises. They may come into an individual. So you may have a partner, an industry partner, or you may have a super fund or someone that wants to invest, but they want to invest specifically in a particular industry. So if they like contract kitchens and they've got some relationship with that, they may have an interest. If they've got like advanced manufacturing and furniture and woodworking or in timber, they may have an interest in those. So they're set up individually. They could be spun off. They could be sold off eventually if they if that made sense. So that option sits there, but they're mainly separate legal entities so that they can have individual investors in it, and the investment could come in the form of debt. It could come in the form of equity. So it may be someone taking an ownership in a part ownership in one of those enterprises that's looking for that that social investment.
Yeah, makes sense.
It did take a lot. I will say it did take a lot of work with KPMG to get the structure right, to make sure that the corporate entity and the other entities can retain their not-for-profit status. So that I would encourage people to make sure they take the right advice in getting that done from a tax standpoint. The question about the 1.7 million, we started with a particular customer who actually approached us initially about it, and it sort of tweaked our interest, and that's where we did the research and found there was no capacity as to why they were coming to us. As it turned out, they haven't actually come on board, but we've actually sold out the capacity without them. But they were there originally when we first started talking about the investment. But I think this is the leap of faith that our board did actually take. Yes, it's a big investment, and but we were reasonably confident based on all the conversations we were having in the market that selling the capacity, this was not going to be the issue. It was actually transitioning employees out of supported employment over to open employment was going to be the biggest issue that we had. And again, whether it was the pension or the benefits that come with it or whatever it might be. Relocating from where they were to another location, all those things obviously come into play. But as it turned out, we've actually been very fortunate. We've been able to sell out the capacity. We've passed all the quality tests. We've passed all the pricing tests, and so we've got some very, very significant contracts now.
Fantastic. A good sales team out there by the sounds.
Yeah, clearly they were.
Excellent. All right, thank you. So opening it up for questions. So Catherine has put a question in the chat, but Catherine, just interested to know if you'd like to ask it directly. I can't actually see you on my screen.
I can't see Catherine either.
But Kane, you've raised your hand. Fire away.
Just turn on the video. G'day, thanks so much for the presentation. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Good Sammy Enterprises in Western Australia.
Yes.
And you will know us, and well done in your model. I was interested in your impact fund in terms of how you've gone about establishing that and whether you've thought about the link as a social impact bond associated with that.
Okay, so the social impact fund is at a very, very early stage. We've been working with two specialists in this area to create the social impact fund. We're working with someone that already has a license to do it. We have a finance and investment committee that has some pretty heavy hitters on it in terms of their past backgrounds in capital raising, and we've been out talking to a lot of funds and a lot of people around the their desire to invest in ESG, and particularly this gives them a bit of E, but mainly the S, which is sort of difficult to find. So it probably will launch, Kane, sometime in this next 6 months. The information memorandum is not too far away from going to press. So we're very early stages at this point. Whether it'll be a bond or whether it'll be equity, you know, we'll probably look at that as individual investments. But I will say this for those online: there is an enormous appetite for investment in the social part of ESG. So if you're looking at potentially doing this, I know Andrew said there'll probably be a segment on this at some point in the future, but and then I'll get the people who can talk to the details of it online and help you and talk to you about it. But yes, this looks like it's a real opportunity. The number of people that have stuck their hand up and interested in putting money into this impact investment is absolutely just mind-blowing to me. And so I see this as a real way of the future.
Yeah, so we'll definitely host another community of practice talking about social impact investment. We'll cover bonds and individual products and legal entities, a whole range of information. But thanks for your question, Kane. Donna, over to you. You've got your hand up.
Thanks, Andrew. I didn't get my camera to work. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yep.
Lovely. Myron, thanks very much for your open presentation. It was really terrific to hear all those details. I just have a question about the transition of some of the business models from the old support employment model to the social enterprise model. I mean, I suspect it's very early days for you, but just wanted to give you any thought around how that transition will work, particularly the industrial relations stuff that will happen in terms of the employees.
Thank you, Donna. Yes, it's there's a lot of work to be done to transition some of these supported employment enterprises to an open enterprise. I'll take that half of the question first. There's a lot of efficiency that needs to be gained. There's probably more discipline in the way that we're going to have to operate all of those sort of things. Working hours, contracts will be changed, those sorts of things. And then clearly they move out from under the supported award wage into whatever the particular business award is, you know, where there'll be an open employment. So yes, in some cases they might be able to transition across depending on the way the legal transition is established. They might be able to transition directly across, whether that's a sale or a transfer of business or something like that. If otherwise they might be entitled to basically in their employment and supported employment and be re-employed in another entity. So yeah, we're still trying to work through some of that at the moment. These are some of the headaches that you will have and we will have as we work our way through that. But there is we have a full team of people that are working on it from an employment standpoint.
Excellent. Thanks, Myron. Thanks, Donna. And Catherine, over to you with your question.
Thank you. The question I wanted to ask is, I understand that you've got Bedford Advisory, which is NDIS, but then you have your social enterprises. I'm interested to know if there's support provided for people that work within your social enterprises between the two entities. Those job coaches, do they come from the Bedford Advisory?
Well, if someone's employed in a Bedford social enterprises and let's say they have an NDIS plan and they can get the supports. They could choose Bedford to provide those supports through our advisory team, or they could choose someone else to provide those supports. Our social enterprises will operate just like, let's say, there was someone who had a job at a local supermarket, and they had an NDIS plan, and they had a job coach that came with them on occasion, and it's their choice. They don't have to choose Bedford. It'll be available to them if they want to choose Bedford, but it wouldn't have to be.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that's another reason to have that separate legal entity as well.
Yes.
So there's complete separation across those business revenue streams. Yeah. Okay, more questions from people. So again, if you put your hand up, I can then see you conveniently at the top of my screen. So Mark, you've got a question. Thank you.
G'day, Myron.
Hi, Mark.
I'm just wondering, thanks for the presentation. Absolutely brilliant what you guys have done. I'm just wondering about the marketing side of it. So with these new social enterprises, will you keep the Bedford name attached to those enterprises?
Good question. And one that we have debated internally now for a while. I think the answer is probably, in some cases we might, but in most cases we will probably operate sub-brands. So if you looked at some of those already, there was one there called APG. That's our landscape construction business, already operates under a different brand. The contract kitchen will operate under a different brand, which will launch in March when we officially open. Part of that is sort of how do you deal with what people know about Bedford? Is there a stigma attached to it? How do you separate yourself really from a branding standpoint in terms of this is open employment, this is not supported employment? We already have people that come to us and say, well, I don't really want to work at Bedford because I don't want to work in supported employment. So we think the way we have to go is to actually operate sub-brands.
Thank you.
Yeah, a great point. And just while we're talking about branding, I'd encourage people to go to Myron's website, because there's actually a section there called Future Bedford, and it talks about their 5-year investment plan, talks about some of the challenges and the opportunities, and also lists what the investment's going to be in. So great, really transparent information there, which is fantastic. Megan, got your hand up. Thank you. You're unmuted, but we can't hear you yet. Megan, you're holding us in great suspense. No, now you've hit mute. Now you're off again. No, all right. Well, we might jump to the next question while we wait for Megan to check out her next session. Otherwise, I'll ask another question. Myron, actually, I might just jump in with my question. You talked about some of the systems changes that you're considering. Can you give us a little bit of an overview on that? Because I think of some of the changes organizations like yourselves have had to go through. They do have to become very transaction orientated. They need to grow the number of clients. They need to have a pipeline of opportunities. Yeah, can you tell us a little bit about what some of the systems that you've had to get rid of because they haven't been sort of fit for purpose, and things that you're looking at rolling out?
Yeah, probably be the most embarrassing answer I give you all day. Look, we're at a point where we're just in the final stages of putting together an ICT strategy that to take us forward. We operate quite manually at the moment, which is not easy. The investment in systems has certainly not been there in the past, but it'll have to be there in the future. Probably one of the biggest topics of conversation around our board table is how are we going to support all this with, how are we going to get the right systems in place to support all this? And it's a really, really good question. It's what we need to do. So I'd say I'd like to take that and come back to you in a few months when we have this strategy in place, and happy to share it with you. We take the view at Bedford that we're not in competition with anyone. If we help someone with disability to improve their life, then we've served our purpose. So we're happy to share.
Okay, excellent. I'll make that as a note for a future community of practice. Donna, fire away.
Thanks, Andrew. Megan's actually put her question in the chat.
Yeah, I'll read that out in a second. Yep.
Myron, it might also, again, be too early in your process, but I was just wondering about the engagement with families and carers and what their questions or issues might have been to date, if you do have any feedback about that.
Sure. So we run a program called Bedford Community Connect, which is a parent and carers forum. It runs online about every 6 to 7 weeks. All across all of our sites. It's actually live at where we're headquartered at Panorama in Adelaide, but it's a live Q&A. It's like watching Q&A. You've got the exec team on the panel, and occasionally some of the directors from the board are there. We have invited guests in to talk about various subjects which have been raised previously, whether it's something to do with superannuation or something to do with ILO, or whatever it may be. But we have had a lot of engagement with them, and we've had a really transparent conversation about what does it mean, what is social enterprise, why are we doing this, and the thing that comes back every time is please don't leave people behind. And I think that's something that we've taken on board all along, to make sure that's one of the things that we more or less said in our announcement. We're not leaving anyone behind. I think it's hard to say you can't leave anyone behind, because circumstances change for people. But yeah, I know we just recently closed a facility that has been open for quite a long time. It was just a building that was literally falling down around us and just not fit for purpose, and we're relocating people now over the next few months, and there's been a lot of learning that's come out of that. There's been a lot of hard conversation sometimes about people having to relocate, which we might take for granted, a little too much for granted, what that means to some families. But yeah, we've been as transparent as we can. We've got this fabulous group of parents who consistently say to me, you tell us what we need to do and we'll help support you. We only want the future of Bedford to be bright. So I think we just operate on the basis that people deal with what they know a lot better than they deal with what they don't know. If they don't know, they tend to make it up, and then that becomes the problem.
Yeah. So Myron, just on that, I would suggest Megan's question's probably in line with that, where you've got the QA discussions, your community connect discussions. So Megan's question is, how are you having the conversations and helping people transition to open employment when they're concerned about their DSP and the impact it will have on that? I'm sure that's a hot topic.
A very hot topic, and not an easy topic, because there's a lot of fixed parts of that you can't do too much about. It's interesting, the transparency of those conversations. In one of those family connect meetings, one of our employees, supported employees, got up and said that I think he was 54 or 5 years old, that he had tried open employment, and he had come back to Bedford. He said, my problem is I don't have much of a super fund to rely on as I get older. I need to have the safety net of that support pension and the benefits that come with it. He said to the group, if I was 25 years old, I would be going into open employment and creating my own super fund for retirement. But he got it, and he said, I I think there's going to be a point where age is going to be a determining factor here for a lot of us that don't have large super funds. And so it was interesting, you know, hearing his conversation. We've been trying to engage with as many people as we can about getting this conversation moving on the disability support pension, and it just seems slow to happen. I think maybe there's a little bit of it starting to happen now as to how, you know, how if people are going to transition to open employment, this is going to be an issue. If the threshold doesn't rise to allow them to earn more money or to work more hours, or to maybe maintain the benefits and give up the pension, something needs to happen if we're going to incentivize people to move into open employment. And that's one of the reasons I say that, well, the NDIS doesn't really provide much of an incentive to move to open employment, because there's too many hurdles to jump through there, I think. You know, I think this is where the government really could help. They really could step in and bring Treasury, bring DSS, bring NDI, bring everyone into the same conversation and say, all right, we now understand this is an issue. And look, I'm sure what we're going to hear out of the Royal Commission is that, you know, everyone should be in open employment. Well, if that's going to be the ultimate goal, if that's where we want to try to get to, this stumbling block's got to be removed. Now, we've built an internal sort of calculator for people that says, well, if I earn this much, I'll work this many hours. This is how my pension moves. So they can use that. They can understand what it means. If I get paid this and I work 3 days a week or whatever it might be, they can work it out. So we just built that on the back of our own, so that people had some way of actually trying to work through the numbers.
Yeah. And just on that, so NDS, as part of their supported employment work, has a working group that's really investigating and gaining momentum around that DSP as to how to influence and inform the government. But you've really highlighted that real issue, which is a lot of supported employees are in an aging workforce, and when they retire, they're not going to have any super. So yeah, that's a massive.
And often it's you know, the pension is, you know, moves with what you earn, you know, but it's often the benefits associated with the pension that they don't want to give up, and maybe there's going to have to be a way to grandfather that or something for those that are on it.
Excellent. Charles, you've got your hand up. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Myron. Fantastic presentation. Loved it. I'm CEO of Brunswick Industries across here in Melbourne. Large amount of difference in size between you guys and us. Considering your magnitude, with sort of, what was it, $80 million of assets and 90 million turnover, something like that. Kitchen, great, love it. Sounds a lot of over $1 million, $2 million, but it's only 2% risk for you guys.
Yep.
Did you have a view on a minimum size of an entity to be able to embark on something like you've done?
No, I have thought about it in just conversation with other disability employers as to whether there was a point where this would be, you know, in this case, scale probably makes it easier. In getting it done, scale might be a little bit of a hardship, but I don't, Charles. I'd have to give it some thought. But I would say that there are a lot of organizations around that support social enterprises, and it is worth sort of getting involved with some of them and having conversations with those organizations. They're not all in disability, obviously. They're all in various forms of enterprise. I'd have to give it some thought, and I think it might just depend on the particular enterprise. But yeah, I'm very much aware, and you know, I certainly don't mean anything by telling you what our size is, but it's just I think it's going to be hard for a lot of smaller people to move away from what they know. But unfortunately, I think the pressure is coming. That's where my concern is. I think real pressure is coming because the people that are going to wind up making policy may or may not really truly understand what they're actually, what impact they're going to have on smaller entities, for sure.
Yeah, I can only
sorry, I can't answer your question very well.
Fully agree. We looked at that percentage that you talked about, the 35 percentage. We're sitting completely on the 180 degree opposite to that.
Yeah.
We know we need to switch over, but it's a question of having the funds to be able to do that, and also the skill sets of your various team members that you talked about.
And I guess just to further broaden the opportunity around social enterprises, whilst Myron's identified a significant opportunity and started a social enterprise, there's certainly opportunities to purchase an existing business and convert it to a social enterprise through those employment strategies as well. And there's lots of examples of that where larger organisations have bought a business, or a small business has been sold to another smaller not-for-profit. So we don't all need to have a significant kitchen opportunity in 1.7 mil available. There are other market entries here. So just before we wrap up, I'm going to hand back to Kerry briefly, unless other people have got any remaining questions for Myron that they would like to ask. And that's a no. Okay, so we won't wrap up just yet, but Myron, thanks very much for the opportunity to talk with you, interview you and learn from you. That's been very, very informative, so I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Andrew.
So over to Kerry.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Myron. That was really, really exciting and really good to see what you're doing. Look, a couple of things that came up, I think, Myron, through your presentation, but also with some of the questions, one was around the social wage and the work that we are doing. Yes, we are working with DSS. We actually have basically a group going where we've already provided a proposal to DSP, and we're looking now to have further discussion around that. The other thing for people to be aware of is, following the announcement around the final determination and direction from the Fair Work Commission, the Department of Social Services are setting up a working group to look at how we can work through that transition to the new wage determination methodology. And so there will be some information coming out in the coming weeks. It is very much at the stage where they're planning with NDS what needs to happen around transition, but there will be further news coming. So just wanted to let people know that we're very aware there's a lot to do in a very, very short period of time. And we will be having a webinar very soon when we get more details from the Department of Social Services. So, Andrew, that was my bit there. So... Excellent.
Thanks, Kerry. Well, thanks very much, everyone. And thanks for everyone's input and conversation. We'll have the next community of practice. We'll send out details very shortly. And in fact, I might even get people's votes on it, because I've written down at least another 3 or 4. So I might get people's input as to what they would like to see, as well as a volunteer presenter. You've seen what's required, and it all goes very well. So thanks very much, everyone. Thanks to NDS and thanks to Myron, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, everyone. Bye.